Brazil, a country that conjures images of vibrant carnivals, breathtaking landscapes, and a rich cultural heritage. But beneath the surface of this colorful nation lies a darker, more sinister reality, a land of bright colors, infectious rhythms, and joyous celebrations. Yet, it is also a place where the shadows of violence and crime lurk, often hidden from the eyes of the world. Amazing views, and a hidden world of violence. In the bustling cities and remote villages, stories of brutality and bloodshed unfold, painting a stark contrast to the country's festive facade. Here, in this country of opposites, is the chilling and gripping story of Pedro Rodrigues Filho, a man whose life story is as complex and multifaceted as Brazil itself. Known as the Brazilian Dexter, Filho wasn't a made-up character. He was a real person, a living nightmare who walked the streets of São Paulo, leaving a trail of fear and death in his wake. He was a real-life nightmare who terrorized São Paulo. His crimes were not the stuff of fiction, but a grim reality that haunted the lives of many. His name, whispered in fear, reminds us of the darkness hidden inside people, a darkness that can emerge in the most unexpected places, transforming ordinary lives into tales of horror. His life, a twisted story of brutality and bloodshed, didn't start in the shadows, but under the hot sun of rural Brazil. It was here, in the seemingly peaceful countryside, that the seeds of his violent future were sown, where the seeds of violence were planted in a troubled childhood. A childhood marked by hardship, neglect, and a harsh environment that would shape the man he would become. Some would say he was a monster born from a broken world, a world where poverty, crime, and despair were everyday realities, creating a breeding ground for the darkness within him. But are monsters born, or are they made by their experiences? This question lingers as we delve into the life of Pedro Rodrigues Filho, seeking to understand the forces that shaped his deadly path. To understand the monster, we must first look into his beginnings. The world he came from, a world of stark contrasts and harsh realities, holds the key to understanding his transformation. The world he came from, a place where beauty and brutality coexist, offers a glimpse into the forces that shaped his life. It is here that we begin our journey into the dark heart of Brazil, and the events that shaped his deadly path. Each step he took, each crime he committed, was a reflection of the world around him, a world that was both his home and his prison. Join us as we travel into the dark heart of Brazil, a journey that will take us through the winding roads of the countryside, the bustling streets of São Paulo, and the shadowy corners where fear and violence reign. Following the steps of Pedro Rodrigues Filho, a man whose life story is a testament to the complex interplay of nature and nurture, of fate and choice. The man who would become known as the monster of the mangroves. His story is not just a tale of horror, but a reflection of the world that created him, a world that we must confront to understand the true nature of the darkness within. Pedro Rodrigues Filho's story doesn't start with a bang, but with a whimper, a life born into poverty and despair. Born in 1954 on a farm in Santa Rita do Sapucaí, Minas Gerais, Brazil, Filho's entry into the world was marked by violence. His skull carried the scars of his father's cruelty from the moment he was born. His father, a man of unrelenting brutality, had struck his pregnant mother in a fit of rage, leaving an indelible mark on his unborn son. This act of violence was not an isolated incident but a grim prelude to the life that awaited Pedro. This early trauma, a sign of the darkness to come, would shape his entire life. Growing up on the edges of society, young Pedro saw the worst of human nature. The farm where he was born was a place of hard labor and little joy, a stark contrast to the innocence of childhood. His family, struggling to make ends meet, often found themselves at the mercy of the elements and the whims of fate. Violence wasn't unusual, it was everywhere, a language spoken in the slums and favelas where he played. The streets were a battleground, and the children who roamed them were soldiers in a war for survival. Pedro, with his scarred head and haunted eyes, quickly learned that kindness was a luxury few could afford. The adults in his life, worn down by their own struggles, offered little in the way of guidance or protection. Survival was a daily fight, a brutal game where only the strong or the clever survived. Pedro's early years were a relentless cycle of hunger, fear, and violence. The other children, sensing his vulnerability, often targeted him, and he had no choice but to defend himself. Each altercation left him more hardened, more determined to never be a victim again. It was in this harsh world that Filho's own violence began to grow. Bullied for a head injury he got before he was born, he learned to fight back. his fists becoming weapons against those who hurt him. Each punch, each drop of blood, fueled the growing darkness inside him, twisting his ideas of right and wrong, justice and revenge. The lines between victim and aggressor blurred, and Pedro found a grim satisfaction in the power he wielded. His fists became his tools of survival, and each fight was a lesson in the harsh realities of his world. The violence that had been inflicted upon him became the violence he inflicted on others. It was a vicious cycle, one that seemed to have no end. The streets of Santa Rita do Sapucay were unforgiving, and Pedro's transformation from a scared child to a hardened fighter was swift and brutal, twisting his ideas of right and wrong, justice and revenge. By 11, the city of Sao Paulo had become his new hunting ground. The move to Sao Paulo was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance for a better life. But the city's sprawling slums and teeming streets offered little respite from the violence Pedro had known all his life. Instead, they provided a new arena for his burgeoning rage. He was a product of his environment, shaped by the unforgiving streets. In Sao Paulo, Pedro's encounters with violence became more frequent and more severe. The city's underbelly was a breeding ground for crime, and Pedro quickly found himself drawn into its depths. The lessons he had learned in the rural slums were put to use in the urban jungle, and his reputation as a fierce and unyielding fighter grew. Here, among the crowds and crushing poverty, Pedro Rodrigues Filho would soon start down a path of unimaginable horrors, forever marking his place in criminal history. The seeds of his future infamy were sown in these early years, watered by the blood and tears of countless battles. The boy who had once been a victim was now a predator, and the world would soon come to know the name Pedro Rodrigues Filho, forever marking his place in criminal history. The story of Pedro Rodrigues Filho is a testament to the destructive power of violence and the ways in which it can shape a life. From the moment he was born, Pedro was ensnared in a web of brutality, and as he grew, he became one of its most fearsome weavers. His journey from a scarred child to a notorious criminal is a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk within us all. 14 years old, an age of awkward growth, changing bodies, and first crushes. For Pedro Rodrigues Filho, it was the age of his first kill. The victim, the vice mayor of Alfenas. The reason, revenge. A simple word, but for Filho it meant justice. His father, a school cafeteria worker falsely accused of stealing, had been murdered, his body thrown away like trash. The unfairness, the anger at his father's senseless death set Filho's soul on fire. He wouldn't let this go. He would become judge, jury, and executioner. Driven by a need for revenge, the teenage Filho found the man he believed killed his father. Armed with nothing but rage and a stolen shotgun, he confronted his target, the sound of each shot a sign of the darkness that had taken him over. The killing was brutal, quick, and terrifyingly cold, but for Filho it was just the start, the first bloody step on a long and terrible journey. The monster had tasted blood, and it wanted more. As Filho's reign of terror grew, a scary pattern emerged. His actions were not random. They were calculated, deliberate, and driven by a dark sense of justice. Filho's methods were chillingly methodical, and his targets were chosen with a twisted rationale that only he could understand. He wasn't just a crazy killer, driven by blind rage. Filho's eyes, filled with a disturbing intensity, revealed a mind that was always calculating, always planning. He was a predator, and his prey were those he deemed unworthy of life. He was a hunter with a twisted sense of purpose. Each step he took in the shadows was a step closer to his next victim. He moved with a predatory grace, always watching, always waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He believed he was cleaning up the world, one life at a time. In his mind he was a necessary force, a dark avenger ridding the streets of those who had slipped through the cracks of justice. His sense of purpose was as unyielding as it was terrifying. His targets? Those he thought were bad, drug dealers, rapists, and criminals who had escaped the law. Filho's twisted moral code dictated that these individuals were beyond redemption, and he took it upon himself to be their judge, jury, and executioner. Filho saw himself as a vigilante, bringing his own kind of bloody justice. He believed that the law had failed, and it was up to him to restore balance. His stern expression and unwavering resolve painted the picture of a man on a mission that left no room for mercy. He would stalk his victims, learning their habits, their weaknesses, before delivering his swift and merciless punishment. Filho's meticulous surveillance ensured that he knew everything about his targets, making his attacks all the more terrifying. Each kill was planned, a horrifying display of his growing cruelty. The crime scenes he left behind were a testament to his meticulous nature and his escalating brutality. Every detail was carefully orchestrated, leaving investigators both horrified and baffled. His methods were as brutal as they were varied. Filho's arsenal included knives, guns, and other instruments of pain, each chosen to inflict maximum suffering. His creativity and violence knew no bounds, and each new method was a grim testament to his dark ingenuity. Stabbings, shootings, torture. Filho used a terrible collection of violent acts, leaving a trail of bodies behind him. The sheer variety of his methods made him unpredictable and all the more dangerous. Each act of violence was a message, a declaration of his twisted sense of justice. Yet even with the fear he caused, some saw him as a hero, a protector of the innocent in a city filled with corruption. To these people, Filho was a necessary evil, a dark knight who did what the law could not. Their praise only fueled his delusions of grandeur. The police, however, knew he was a cold-blooded killer who had to be stopped. They saw through the vigilante facade and recognized the true monster behind the mask. Their briefings grew more urgent, their strategies more desperate as they raced against time to end his reign of terror. The hunt for the Brazilian Dexter got stronger, each new victim adding fuel to the fire. The detectives were relentless, their determination unwavering. Every clue, every lead was a step closer to capturing the elusive killer who had turned their city into a hunting ground. They didn't know the net was closing in on Filho, and his bloody rampage was about to end. The final confrontation was imminent, a clash between the forces of law and the embodiment of vigilante justice. The city held its breath, waiting for the moment when Filho's dark saga would reach its inevitable conclusion.